There are homes where silence lives, where laughter is rare, and every day feels like a heavy burden. But that was not the case with the household of Mr. and Mrs. Nwankwo in Abia State. Their compound, tucked in one of the bustling neighborhoods of the city, was always alive with the noise of children, the hum of machines, and the thick smell of leather polish from the workshop that stood proudly at the front yard. Chioma, the third child of the family, was the kind of girl who carried sunshine in her steps. At 17, her life was a delicate balance between schoolwork and her father's flourishing footwear business. Her dreams were no secret. She often spoke about how she would one day expand her father's modest workshop into a factory that would rival those in Lagos and beyond. "Papa, one day Abba-made shoes will stand shoulder to shoulder with Italian brands," she would say, her eyes glittering with determination. Her father would laugh and pat her on the back, calling her "my little lioness." The Nwankwo household was not wealthy by the world's standards, but they were comfortable enough. Mr. Nwankwo's footwear workshop was well respected. Local traders came from Onitsha, Port Harcourt, and even Owerri to buy his sturdy sandals and polished dress shoes. His wife Mama Chioma ran a small provision stall near the house where children came to buy sweets, biscuits, and gari. Between both businesses, the children never lacked school fees, decent clothes, or food. Chioma and her siblings lived a life full of routine, but it was a routine they loved. Mornings began with school uniforms neatly ironed by their mother. Afternoons were spent in classrooms, scribbling notes, and evenings always found them in the workshop, hands busy polishing leather or helping stitch soles. Saturdays belonged to cleaning the compound and preparing for Sunday Mass at the Roman Catholic Church, where the entire family walked in together neatly dressed, heads held high, a picture of unity and respect. Though Chioma was still in secondary school, she already behaved like a young entrepreneur. She loved learning the details of how shoes were crafted, measuring, cutting, stitching, and polishing. Unlike her two older sisters who dreamed of nursing and teaching careers, she saw herself carrying the family trade forward, modernizing it, and making her father proud. That dream was her anchor, and every late night she spent poring over her books, she whispered to herself, "Papa will see me succeed. I will lift our name higher." But life, as it often does, had a way of rewriting dreams with the ink of uncertainty. It began one humid evening in Abba. The workshop was alive with the clatter of hammers and the smell of glue. Chioma had just returned from school, her school bag still slung over her shoulder, when her father received a phone call. His face tightened as he listened, his usually warm eyes flickering with concern. He didn't say much to the children, only gestured to his wife to step aside. They spoke in hushed tones, voices too low for Chioma or her siblings to catch. But the weight in their mother's eyes afterward told them something was wrong. That night, the dinner table felt different. While the children chattered about school, their father barely touched his food. Finally, he cleared his throat and said in Igbo, "Nay, I have to travel to the village. They've called me for something urgent." "It not cost. Now? At this hour?" his wife asked, her voice edged with worry. "Yes," he replied firmly. "I won't be gone long." And that was all he said. The next morning, before the rooster crowed, he packed a small bag and left. He kissed his wife on the forehead, but when Chioma asked where he was going, he only smiled and said, "Take care of your mother for me. You are my lioness." Then he was gone, leaving behind the smell of leather, his half-finished shoes, and a silence that crept into the house. At first, no one thought much of it. Men in Abba often traveled to their villages for urgent family meetings, funerals, land disputes, or traditional obligations. But when 2 days passed, with no word, worry began to stir like dust in a storm. By the third day, the tension had grown unbearable. Mama Chioma tried calling relatives in the village, only to be told that no one had seen him. Confusion turned to fear, and fear soon hardened into panic. That evening, the phone rang. The number was strange, unfamiliar. Chioma's mother picked it up, her hands trembling. "Listen carefully," a cold voice said on the other end. If you want to see your husband alive, bring 50 million naira. Do not involve the police, unless you want to bury him instead. Then the line went dead. The world seemed to tilt beneath their feet. 50 million naira? Where would they find such money? Even if they sold the workshop, the stall, the house, and every piece of jewelry they owned, it would still not be enough. For the first time in her life, Chioma saw her mother cry in helplessness. It wasn't the kind of weeping that came with ordinary pain. It was the sound of a woman who realized her whole world was collapsing. Her elder brother tried to console their mother, while her sisters clung to each other in terror. Chioma, her heart pounding like a drum, stared at the dark window and whispered a silent prayer. God, don't let anything happen to Papa. The days that followed blurred into a storm of desperation. Every valuable item was sold. Every favor called in. Every relative begged. At last they scraped together 20 million, far from what the kidnappers demanded, but it was all they had. They could only hope the criminals would accept it. When the kidnappers finally called again, Mama Chioma, her voice shaking, explained they had only managed to raise 20 million. The voice on the other end chuckled darkly. "Bring it," he said. "We will tell you where to find your husband." And so, one evening, with her eldest son by her side, Mama Chioma carried a heavy sack filled with the money. They drove towards Okigwe, a place far enough from Aba to feel like another world. The road was lonely, the kind that made shadows stretch long and whisper of danger. At the designated point, they dropped the sack and called the number again. "Leave now," the voice instructed. "We will send you his location." Their hearts pounded as they drove away, waiting for a message that felt like it took centuries to arrive. Finally, a text came. With trembling hands, they followed the directions, only to find him lying on the ground, lifeless, hands tied behind his back, eyes staring at nothing. The scream that tore from Mama Chioma's throat that night would never leave Chioma's memory. It was not just the cry of a widow. It was the sound of a world shattering into pieces. That was the day laughter left their house. Grief is a strange visitor. It does not knock before entering. It storms in, rearranging lives, leaving scars that never truly heal. For the Nwankwo family, grief arrived on that cursed night in Okigwe when the lifeless body of their father lay before them. When word spread that Mr. Nwankwo had been killed despite the ransom, the entire neighborhood in Aba fell silent. Men shook their heads in disbelief, women wailed openly, and children peered from behind doors, whispering about the family whose laughter had once filled the street. In Aba, death was not uncommon, but betrayal like this after the family had given all they had was a wound that cut deeper than a knife. The funeral came quickly. His body, still bound in ropes when it was found, had to be washed, dressed, and laid in a coffin. Chioma, her siblings, and their mother sat together in their compound, surrounded by mourners. The air was thick with incense, the mournful toll of church bells, and the cries of relatives who had not even offered a single kobo when the family begged for help. Now they came in numbers, their voices loud, their lamentations dramatic, but none of them had stood by when the Nwankwos needed them most. Chioma sat stiffly during the burial, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her father's coffin was lowered into the red Aba soil, and with every thud of sand on the wooden lid, something in her heart broke. She remembered his laughter, his rough but gentle hands guiding her as she stitched leather, his voice calling her lioness. Now all of it was gone, stolen by men whose faces they would never see again. But grief was not the only visitor that entered their home that week. Debt soon followed, knocking louder than tears could drown. Suppliers began arriving, some polite, others ruthless. They demanded payment for materials her father had taken on credit. Rolls of leather, tins of polish, boxes of glue, all unpaid. "Business is business," one supplier barked at Chioma's mother, his face hardened with greed. "Your husband may be gone, but money does not die with him." Day after day, creditors crowded their compound, voices rising, threats made. Some even confiscated tools and unfinished shoes from the workshop, dragging away the very foundation of the family's livelihood. What was once a proud and bustling workshop now looked like a looted battlefield. The neighbors who once admired the Nwankwos began to avoid them. Some whispered that perhaps their father had secrets in the village, debts hidden or enemies untold. Others speculated that the kidnapping was an inside job. Rumors grew like weeds, but none of them put food on the table. Within a month, the family's world collapsed entirely. The shop was gone, their savings emptied, and the petty provision stall could no longer keep them afloat. Chioma watched her mother wither before her eyes. Mama Chioma's once energetic steps slowed. Her eyes grew hollow. At night, Chioma often heard her mother whispering prayers, her voice trembling as she begged God for strength. Eventually, the decision was made. They had to leave Abba. The debts were too heavy, the shame too great, the harassment unbearable. They packed what little remained and moved to Owerri, hoping that a new city might bring healing. But Owerri was not a land of miracles. It was simply another battlefield where survival demanded more than they had to give. It was in Owerri that life scattered them, like seeds blown by the wind. Relatives who had been silent during the funeral suddenly stepped forward, offering to help by taking in one child or another. To outsiders, it looked like generosity. To Chioma, it felt like dismemberment. One by one, her siblings were distributed to uncles, aunts, and cousins. Some went to families who saw them as extra hands for chores, not children in mourning. Chioma, once the bright-eyed lioness, found herself stripped of choice. She wanted to continue school. She had been preparing for her WAEC and JAMB exams, but the reality was cruel. There was no money for fees, no stable roof, no father to guide her. Dreams of becoming a great entrepreneur faded like smoke in Harmattan. Instead, she became a sales girl. A small shop in the city center offered her a job for 10,000 naira a month. 10,000, an amount so small it barely fed her for 2 weeks. Yet she clung to it because it meant survival. Every day, she stood behind a counter selling provisions, her school uniform replaced by plain dresses, her books gathering dust in a corner of her mother's room. Her world had shrunk from classrooms and workshops to counting change, bagging rice, and smiling at strangers. Yet behind that smile lived a storm. She would sometimes close her eyes and remember how she once sat by her father's side, dreaming aloud of factories, international trade, and a future where her family name was known. Now, those dreams mocked her, whispering, "Lioness, where is your roar?" Still, she endured. She endured the endless days of standing on her feet, the leering eyes of men who mistook her vulnerability for invitation, and the ache in her chest whenever she saw other girls her age in neatly pressed uniforms, laughing as they headed to school. Chioma's mother noticed the fire dimming in her daughter's eyes. One evening, she pulled Chioma close and stroked her hair. "Nay, life may have scattered our plans, but you are not lost. A lioness may be wounded, but she does not forget how to fight." Chioma swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill. "Mama, I don't feel like a lioness anymore. I feel like a prisoner." Her mother held her tighter. "Then pray, my child, for even a prisoner can one day walk free." But in her heart, Chioma wondered, would freedom ever come? Or was this new life the life of loss, debt, and survival her destiny? Little did she know, fate had already set another path for her. One that would lead her far from Owerri, far from Nigeria itself. But that path, though paved with promises, was darker and more dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. And it was waiting, just around the corner.